Good afternoon, and welcome to this presentation, Gateway to the Future, the Knights of Columbus Headquarters Building. On behalf of the Knights of Columbus Museum, thank you for joining this session, which is one in a weekly series of online presentations for the benefit of museum patrons and the general public. This presentation is being recorded and will be available for viewing on the museum's YouTube and Facebook accounts. An email message to all registrants will provide a video link and information about next week's topic, which is a complement to today's topic, looking at the 6 previous Knights of Columbus headquarters sites in the Elm City. A few notes before we begin. The Knights of Columbus Museum remains closed while we wait and pray for the end of this COVID-19 pandemic. For information about the museum and other upcoming events and offerings, visit kofcmuseum.org or follow the museum on social media at KOFC Museum. During the talk, you may submit questions at any point using the questions utility. I'll address a selection of your questions to our presenter at the conclusion during the Q&A session. Her presentation should last about 40 minutes. As a preface to the talk, I'll simply say that the Knights of Columbus takes pride in the city of its heritage and it employs about 900 people in New Haven. Most of them in the headquarters facility that we'll discuss today, but not all. Some organizations established in a location as long as the Knights of Columbus have been, 130 plus years, can take some satisfaction in their longevity. And the Knights of Columbus, which now enjoys outreach across the globe, does indeed take such satisfaction within the city, although there are a few academic institutions that have called New Haven home for more than 300 years. So New Haven is indeed a historic city, and the Knights of Columbus enjoys its place within the fabric of that community. Today's presenter is VivianLea Solek, and she is the Knights of Columbus Supreme Council archivist. VivianLea holds a Master's in Arts from in American Studies from the George Washington University and a MS degree in Library and Information Science with an archives concentration from Simmons University. VivianLea, together with our colleague Tiffany Locke, have curated a museum exhibition on the headquarters building to commemorate its 50 years at the Gateway to New Haven. So you will benefit from her research this afternoon. VivianLea has also provided 2 supplemental documents that are available in the handout section. And VivianLea, the session is yours.
Thank you very much, Peter. For our viewers, I'd like to offer a note about the materials that they're going to see in today's webinar. Unless otherwise noted on the slides, all the documents you'll see are from the Knights of Columbus Supreme Council archives. All photographs are from the Knights of Columbus Multimedia archives, and all 3-dimensional objects are from the Knights of Columbus Museum. And a reminder, if you enjoy today's webinar, and I hope you will, and you're curious about the first headquarters of the Knights of Columbus, I invite you to join us next Thursday, May 28th at 2 o'clock for the second webinar, Building to Grow, Early Headquarters of the Knights of Columbus. As Peter mentioned, information about registering for the webinar is located on the museum's website and on our Facebook page. In 1882, the Knights of Columbus held its initial organizational meetings in the basement of St. Mary's Church, New Haven, which you see here. Over the next 138 years, the Knights have occupied 7 different buildings in downtown New Haven, all within a 0.6 of a mile radius. With each significant milestone in the growth of membership and insurance in force, the Knights have needed a larger headquarters. The current headquarters, headquarters number 7, is built in a modernist architectural style. The building has dominated the New Haven skyline for over 50 years and was designed by architect Kevin Roche, who passed away March 1st, 2019. This timeless building stands as an homage to this award-winning architect's 6-decade-long career. Before we dive into the building, let's look at two of the key people involved in the project. The first is Mayor Richard C. Lee. When Lee took office in 1954, he was the youngest mayor in the city's history up to that point. During his 16 years in office, Lee spearheaded New Haven's redevelopment through the New Haven Redevelopment Agency. He used the agency to advocate for projects and funds and to push his idealistic visions for the city. The agency aided New Haven in receiving more federal dollars per capita than any other United States city. With this money, Mayor Lee took swift action to transform New Haven into a model city. Through the period of redevelopment, Mayor Lee recruited notable architects such as Douglas Orr, Paul Randolph, Mies van der Rohe, Marcel Breuer, and Kevin Roche. Redevelopment efforts spearheaded by Mayor Lee included Oak Street, Dixwell Avenue, Long Wharf, and Church Street, which included the Knights of Columbus headquarters. And in this photograph, we see Mayor Lee speaking at the dedication of the original Columbus Plaza in front of the 6th headquarters building, which was over on Meadow Street and Union Avenue. And this was taken May 6, 1954. In the letter on the right, you'll notice the final paragraph, and this illustrates that Lee not only had a vested business interest in the Knights of Columbus being located in New Haven, but also a personal one. Lee was a Catholic and a member of St. Mary's Parish, the birthplace of the order, and he became a member of the Knights in 1950. It's interesting that during research for this exhibition, this was the only written verification found in the archives of his membership in the order. So what is redevelopment? After World War II, returning veterans were welcomed home with low-cost mortgages as part of the GI Bill. This enabled people to leave cities and move to new homes in the growing suburbs. This exodus exposed the blight of the cities from their overcrowded and substandard slums to their declining business districts. From 1949 through 1973, the United States government created legislation aimed at rehabilitating urban residential areas and revitalizing city economies. The availability of federal funds to support this development led to a period of urban renewal across the country from New York City to Los Angeles and in almost every city in between, including New Haven. Redevelopment remains a very controversial subject. For all its benefits and consequences, one thing is for certain: urban renewal reshaped and redefined cityscapes, and its impact is still debated passionately. In this slide, we see the Church Street project area in New Haven. The left photograph was taken in 1934, and I encourage you to notice the housing and the smaller buildings. On the right, the image was taken in 1965, and this is the same area with the housing and smaller buildings torn down and the Oak Street connector, or Route 34, now built. And the connector is the gateway into downtown and brings traffic into New Haven from Interstates 95 and 91. And you can see here is that connector. And notice the location of the 6th headquarters building, as well as the future site for the New Haven Community Services building, which is now home to the Knights of Columbus Museum. And the gold star represents the building site for the current headquarters. Now, the next key person in the project is the architect Kevin Roche. Born and educated in Ireland, he received his undergraduate architecture degree from University College Dublin. And after graduation, he moved to Chicago and worked for the noted architect Mies van der Rohe. In 1949, Roche joined the firm of Eero Saarinen and Associates, which was based in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. By 1953, just 4 years later, he had been named chief designer for the firm. In 1961, the decision was made to move Saarinen's firm to Hamden, Connecticut, due to multiple East Coast commissions, including some at Yale University. But just weeks prior to the move, Saarinen passed away unexpectedly. But the remaining principal architects decided to go ahead with the planned relocation. The firm's name remained Eero Saarinen Associates until Saarinen's designs were completed. In 1966, the firm name was then changed to Kevin Roche, John Dinkeloo and Associates. Roche's legacy as an architect is both a breadth and a depth of projects. There were 12 Saarinen projects for which Kevin Roche resolved the remaining design issues and saw to completion. These projects included Dulles International Airport outside Washington, D.C., and that is the top left image, and then the St. Louis Gateway Arch, again on the top. Roche served as the architect for the master plan and expansion of the Metropolitan Museum of Art for 45 years, during which time he worked on 46 different projects, installing many of its collections and designing all of its new wings. One well-known wing is the Sackler Wing, which houses the Temple of Dindor, which is seen in the lower left photo. Other major projects include the New Haven Veterans Memorial Coliseum, which stood adjacent to the Knights of Columbus headquarters, the Richard C. Lee High School in New Haven, and that's the black and white photo in the middle of the bottom row of images, the Oakland Museum, and several projects in New York City, including the stunning Ford Foundation headquarters, which you see an interior shot of on the right, the bottom right. He also designed United Nations Plaza and the Central Park Zoo. In addition, Roche has designed a variety of institutional and corporate projects, including 38 corporate headquarters, 3 hotel and apartment buildings, 8 museums, numerous research facilities, theaters, schools, factories, performing arts centers, and private homes. Other projects that Roche completed for the Knights of Columbus include the steeple addition to St. Mary's Church, the birthplace of the order in New Haven, and the staging and papal chair for the 1996 Papal Mass at Aqueduct Racetrack in New York. Roche's work was honored by the American Institute of Architects, the French Academy of Architecture, and the American Academy of Arts and Letters. And in a singular combination in the architectural world, Roche was awarded both the Pritzker Prize, which honors architects whose work has sent the profession in new directions, and the Arthur Ross Award, which honors excellence in classical architecture. For those of you who may not be familiar with New Haven, I wanted to show you on this slide where New Haven is located within Connecticut. We have New York City down here, Hartford, Connecticut, our capital up here, and of course here is New Haven right on the shore. And in this map, you can see this is 95, continuing up the eastern seaboard. 91 is coming down from Hartford, and here is the Oak Street connector, or Route 34, with the Knights of Columbus headquarters situated there. So as early as 1962, the New Haven Redevelopment Agency officials were corresponding with the Knights of Columbus on the creation of a new headquarters within the city limits. These conversations ramped up in late 1964, leading Mayor Lee to introduce Kevin Roche to the Knights of Columbus and Supreme Knight John McDevitt. McDevitt had recognized that the Meadow Street headquarters number 6, had been a stopgap location for the organization, and it no longer met the requirements for providing exceptional services to the membership. In a letter to employees dated April 14, 1965, Supreme Knight McDevitt acknowledged that the current headquarters was at capacity and almost unsafe for employees, and this further heightened the need for a new building. On the same day, McDevitt held a joint press conference with Mayor Lee and Kevin Roche and announced that the Knights would build a new headquarters in New Haven. In this site plan, you see how the building is set on the small 85,000 square foot site. Roche decided to place it at an angle to Church Street, creating a more inviting entrance from the Oak Street connector, which is just off the plan right here. Also, it established a visual bridge with the city grid and allowed motorists to experience the structure while driving on the interstates around New Haven. The new location for the headquarters was crowned not only as a gateway to downtown New Haven, but also to New England. Roche's design inspirations for the building ranged from Norman architecture to the La Tour de la Bourse, a 48-story skyscraper in Montreal, Canada. I think in these images, we clearly can see how these buildings inspired Roche's design for the Knights of Columbus headquarters. In an interview with Architectural Record in May 1968, Roche commented, quote, "We think first about the purpose of the building, then about the environment, the nature of the site, and what contribution we can make to it, then about how to build it." Roche had a small plot of land on which he had to build a building with large open interior spaces. The building's layout met the intended functions of the Knights. It provided the insurance component of the order with large, unbroken work areas that were not overwhelming in size and promoted community. And here we see how the design influences drove the plan of the building. With the exception of the elevator shafts, the mechanical systems, or the heating, ventilation, air conditioning, electrical, plumbing, were pushed to the 4 towers. This allowed for an uninterrupted flow of offices around the center elevator core. So in early 1967, Koppers Company of New York and Pittsburgh was selected as the contractor for the building. It was hoped that the groundbreaking would occur on Founders Day, March 29, 1967, the 85th anniversary of the founding of the Knights of Columbus. However, due to legal issues and other details, groundbreaking was delayed until May 2nd that year. And in this photo from the groundbreaking, we see first an unidentified person, Supreme Knight John McDevitt, State Insurance Commissioner William Cotter, Auxiliary Bishop John Hackett, and Brother Knight Mayor Richard Lee of New Haven. The hard hat that you see was worn at the groundbreaking by Supreme Knight John McDevitt, and similar hard hats were worn by other officials participating in the groundbreaking. And in this photo, we see construction beginning, and we see the footing mat on which the tower would be built. The pad is a 5-foot thick concrete pad which sits 20 feet below ground, and it was constructed with 6,000 tons of concrete. In the background, the buildings highlighted in yellow are on the left, the 6th headquarters building on Meadow Street, and the Knights of Columbus printing plant on the right. Now, the towers were built with a technique called slip-form construction. Concrete is continuously poured into a slip form, which is lifted by hydraulic jacks. And there is a link in the bibliography for a video that shows how this construction technique works, or you could simply Google slip form construction and find others. The concrete pour began on Columbus Day, October 12, 1967, and was completed by 8 p.m. on Thanksgiving night, November 23rd. The pour took 40 days and 40 nights to complete. When completed, the towers measured 91 feet in circumference and were 320 feet high. The towers and the central elevator shaft consumed almost 14,000 tons of cement and over 515 tons of steel reinforcing rods. And here you see the towers continuing to rise. The pouring of the concrete was completed on the evening of November 23, 1967, but the formal completion ceremony, known as the topping off, did not occur until November 27th due to the Thanksgiving holiday. Following a construction tradition, the Knights raised a 20-foot blue spruce and placed it on top of one of the towers. This custom honors the construction crew's accomplishment and is viewed as the building's first introduction to the public. In the steel trade, the tree symbolizes that construction has reached the sky without loss of life or injury and bodes well for future building inhabitants. Due to its placement at the beginning of the Christmas season, the Knights decorated the tree with lights and kept it on the tower throughout the holidays. I selected this photo of partial construction because of the incredible sculptural quality of the image, but also because it provides a great look at how the building is actually constructed. The building has an external skeleton or exoskeleton. The structural support for the building is constructed of exposed Corten steel girders, which span the space between the towers to support the floors. Corten steel, sometimes known as weathered steel, is a group of steel alloys that are often used in outdoor construction. It was developed to eliminate the need for painting because if left exposed to the elements, it develops a layer of oxidation within a year, which prevents further corrosion. The steel girders are secured within niches in the columns, and you can see here some of the niches that are yet to be filled. You can see how the steel beams connect between the towers. What's interesting is that the beams are not bolted in place, which allows for expansion and contraction. Due to European research, Roche knew that the glass wall, which was recessed 5 feet from the exterior steel, would protect the steel outside the building in case of a fire. This was a new type of construction which had to be approved to ensure that it met the fire code. This slide gives us a close-up look at one of the silo tiles used on the 4 towers of the headquarters building. Normally used on grain silos in the Midwest, Roche chose these tiles with their chamfered or beveled tops to create a strong horizontal shadow and balance the vertical thrust of the towers. The tiles measure 13 by 13.5 by 3 3/4 and weigh approximately 43 pounds. Each course or row of tiles contains 72.5 tiles, and there are approximately 19,000 tiles on each tower, or a total of 76,000 tiles in the building. And in this image, you can see the completed Knights of Columbus headquarters. Behind it is the New Haven Coliseum, which has been torn down. And it's important to remember that Roche designed both of these buildings, and they were meant to work together stylistically. Behind the Coliseum, you can see the New Haven Community Services Building, again, now the home of the Knights of Columbus Museum. So the ribbon cutting for the headquarters occurred during the 1969 Supreme Convention. 5 days prior to the dedication of the building, the Knights did not yet have a temporary certificate of occupancy due to incomplete mechanical and electrical systems. 5 floors of the structure in the plaza were completed, however. The Knights occupied the building in late March 1970 and received the final certificate of occupancy on February 24, 1971. Like many of their earlier headquarters, the Knights built a larger building than they needed at the time. Tenants helped fill the building until 1984, when the Knights had grown and needed the space. Tenants in the building included the Connecticut Bank and Trust Company, the Schick Safety Razor Company, law firms, insurance companies, and the Connecticut Motor Club and their partner WELI, who broadcast traffic reports from the cafeteria on the 22nd floor. And in these images on the left, we see the the scissors that were used at the ribbon cutting. And these were used by Supreme Knight John McDevitt and the Apostolic Delegate Luigi Raimondi. And he also conducted the blessing of the building. On the photo at right, and I'm going to use my cursor, we have hiding back here our Supreme Chaplain at the time, Bishop Charles P. Greco, the Connecticut State Deputy, Raymond Bedard, Governor John Dempsey, the Apostolic Delegate Luigi Raimondi, and Supreme Knight John McDevitt, Mayor Lee, and Archbishop John Whalen of Hartford. As part of the dedication and ribbon cutting ceremony, a time capsule was buried to the right of the front door near a tower. And there is still a paver there marked 1969, like the one you see in the image at left, to indicate the former location of the time capsule. During the Knights of Columbus Centennial in 1882, a statue of Father McGivney was installed to the left of the front door, and a new time capsule was buried behind it. And in the image at left, you see the original tin box and paver and a gavel that is believed to have been buried in the time capsule. And in the photo at right, from left to right, you have Governor John Dempsey, Mayor Richard Lee, Terrence Cardinal Cook, Supreme Knight McDevitt holding the tin time capsule, and Archbishop John Whalen of Hartford. Although the creation of a chapel within the headquarters was an original component of the design, it was dropped before the building was occupied. Under past Supreme Knight Virgil Decant, the idea resurfaced and was implemented in 1980. Upon its completion, the past Supreme Knight noted that prior to then, quote, "In a sense, our building was a massive body, but a body which in another sense had no soul." The original chapel underwent a complete transformation in early 2005. The Knights commissioned Slovenian mosaic artist Father Marko Rupnik to create 4 mosaic walls for the redesigned chapel, his first major work in the United States. Working between January 22nd and February 12th, 2005, the artists worked 13 to 14-hour days to complete the project, but they always concluded the day with a mass. To create the life-size mosaics, the artist used a combination of locally sourced materials, including Stony Creek granite, and small pieces of tile and glass known as tesserae. And here you can see one of the finished walls, and on the right, the workmen installing the mosaics. In earlier headquarters, singular rooms had been devoted to Knights of Columbus artifacts. Even as early as 1969, brochures on the current Knights of Columbus headquarters noted the presence of a museum and library. Once Virgil Decant became Supreme Knight in 1977, the creation of a museum chronicling the history of the order became a priority. In the same year, the first curator was hired and documentation of the existing collection began. The new museum was blessed and dedicated on Founders Day weekend in March 1982. And this was done as part of the centennial anniversary celebrations of the Knights of Columbus. The first iteration of the museum was established on the majority of the 4th floor of the headquarters building and was open to the public. It was designed by Minos Jordanidis of Kevin Roche, John Dinkerlew and Associates. And the museum moved from its headquarters to its current location in 2000. And here on the left, we have some of the exhibit cases in the then new museum. And on the right, you see Archbishop John Whalen of Hartford blessing the new museum on Founders Day 1982. In October of 1970, shortly after the Knights took occupancy of the building, a jury sponsored by the American Institute of Steel Construction recognized the building in its 11th annual competition for steel frame buildings. Initiated in 1960, their awards program encouraged and recognized outstanding aesthetic design in structural steel. The jurors commented that the building, quote, is very strong visually, but does not overpower its surroundings. The exposed steel framing defines the structure with great clarity. And on the left, you can see the AISC award. By 2011, with the building nearing 45 years of age, the mid-20th century heating, cooling, and glazing technologies were in a state of near failure. Faced with either renovating or once again building a new headquarters, the Knights worked with architect Leo Daly to completely replace the windows, window frames and blinds, and metal sunshades. Simultaneously, the heating and cooling systems were modernized. What's fascinating about this project is that the project was completed while the employees continued to occupy the building, with the work being completed at night. In recognition of this invisible preservation work, the New Haven Preservation Trust awarded the Knights of Columbus their landmark plaque in 2016, and you can see that in the right-hand photo. This award recognizes extraordinary devotion to preservation of New Haven buildings or sites of outstanding and enduring architectural and historic significance. So what is the legacy of this modern marvel? In the years before and after the construction of the Knights of Columbus headquarters, its innovative design intrigued architectural writers in the United States and around the world. The corner towers solved a critical site dilemma. Given the small building footprint, how do you maximize the small floor area, and where do you place mechanical systems? The tower placement also created an identical facade on all four sides, eliminating the possible issue of the building's negative perception. To create these towers, both the slip-form construction method and tile frontage were techniques borrowed from silo building in the Midwest United States. Additionally, the steel girders that connect the four towers are revolutionary in that they are exposed and unpainted. 50 years on, the Knights of Columbus headquarters still makes an iconic statement in the New Haven skyline. The design integrated techniques previously unused in office building construction, and in the process solved numerous architectural problems. The headquarters has received accolades for its innovation historically and continues to be honored for its preservation as part of the New Haven skyline. The timeless structure is a fitting tribute to its architect, Kevin Roche, and to all those who have worked within its walls to advance the mission of the Knights of Columbus. And this photo is certainly a very fitting one on which to end, as it was taken last week, and it captures the flyover of the Connecticut National Guard to honor our heroes, our frontline heroes during this pandemic. In conclusion, let's hear Kevin Roche describe the building in his own words. And after this short video, I'll be happy to answer questions that you've put in the chat box. Peter?
The idea for the Knights was the site was relatively small. I can't remember now how many square feet the whole thing was. But we thought that if we made smaller floors, again, it's this idea of not putting people in overwhelmingly large floors and, you know, these photographs that you would see at that time of people desk after desk after desk and row after row. And I couldn't think of anything more awful than having to live your life like that. So I thought if we could make a smaller floor plate and have it be the center of the building and have it be small enough so you'd get a kind of community going. There would be 20, 30 or 40, 20, 30 people. And they would have windows all the way around. And then we'd put the stairs and the toilets in the corners, which is the opposite of what, of course, is done in any office building, where you put people in the corners with the corner offices, you know, a law firm or something like that. But this was a different kind of situation because all of the office people would be on the top floors. So we thought that would be much nicer, and there were nice views out of it. You could see the harbor and all of that. So I had been up in Montreal doing some research on something else, and there was a building up there done by a famous engineer architect. It was one of the few buildings that I'd seen where they'd put the columns in the corner. And I was very interested in that because it seemed to make such a strong building. So I was going back and forth and back and forth. And there was this town, I don't know whether it was Waterbury, it's one of the towns on the way. And there was a large chimney stack. And I was very interested in that because it's sort of a brick stack, and I was very interested in the idea of building this cylindrical thing. And in the Midwest, there is a silo construction where they use this 12-inch by 12-inch interlocking tile to make the silo. And that's what, in fact, we did use. And we have the 4 towers are built, covered with that. And the 4 towers are concrete pours, and it was a non-stop pour as it went up, and then in between we just spanned the steel in between that. So it's a very, very simple structural system and a very quick structural system. And it was very unique because it was a mixture of both steel and concrete, which was really not very often done. That was one of the issues. Then the other one was the problem of the sun penetrating into a building, and I'd been looking at the idea of shading the outside of the building, as we did subsequently. But in this case, it was a very simple thing to do because we had a beam spanning the 90 feet between the 2 concrete towers, and the beams from the inside come out and rest on that. And then between that, there's a 5-foot gap between that and the wall, and we put the louvers in there. So you had the louvers not as obvious shades or anything like that, but just as a shading device, and it became a fairly strong structural architectural statement as well. I think it's completely unique.
VivianLea, thank you very much. And
Thank you.
We have a few questions that are beginning to come in. So with your indulgence, I will offer some of these questions. How has the building's design allowed the KFC to adapt over time?
Well, I think the big thing to point to is that it was more space than we needed when it was built. And so it has allowed us to grow and provided us with the space we need to do the insurance work that the Knights do, the charitable work that it does. So, you know, the building, we sort of grew into the building.
Okay, are there further questions? I've had a number of compliments, VivianLea, on the people enjoying the presentation. If there are other questions, please use the questions utility, and we'll be happy to address your thoughts.
And while people are thinking of questions, I'll take this opportunity to remind them that if they'd like to learn about the first 6 headquarters and learn more about that recurring theme of we build bigger buildings than we've needed, and then we grow into them. I encourage them to register and join us for next week's webinar at 2 o'clock on Thursday, the 28th.
VivianLea, we have a question regarding the printing plant. How was that connected to the 1969 headquarters building?
It is physically, or I should say it was not physically connected. It was across the street. And I will try, if you're able to join us next week, I believe I'm going to use an image that is an aerial view that shows the relationship of the two buildings. The headquarters building, if you're familiar with New Haven, is where the current New Haven Police Department building sits, down from the museum. And this is near the New Haven train station. And in fact, the building, the 6th headquarters building, was the home of, I'm going to get the name wrong, but it's the New Haven, New York and Hartford Railroad, I believe. And that was the building into which we moved. And then the printing plant was built same street, but at the opposite end of the block and on the opposite side of the street. So it wasn't physically connected to the headquarters. Although when we first went into the 6th headquarters, the printing operations were in the basement. That was part of why we went into that building, because it would allow us to bring those operations into the headquarters building. But then again, as we grew and needed that space, then they built that standalone printing plant building.
Thank you, VivianLea. Another question: how does the architecture fit within the context of other strong modernist or brutalist architecture within New Haven?
I will be honest, I have not studied a lot of the architecture of New Haven. I think it is a great tribute to Roche. And one of the things that I personally like about this building is sometimes modernist architecture, to my eye, can be dated, even though at the time it was meant to be very streamlined and sleek and modern. But this building, I think, it does have a timeless quality. I think people looking back at it may, in another 50 years, may not realize that it's 100 years old. So I will leave that to others, such as the New Haven Preservation Trust, who have a wonderful modernist architecture component to their website. And that was actually the project which generated the video that we showed on Mr. Roche. And I encourage you to explore their website. I'll leave the very detailed architectural history to those who have made a much longer study of it than I have.
VivianLea, do you know whether Mr. Roche had any comment on the demolition of the Coliseum at the time and how it affected the presentation of the tower?
I do believe that he was very upset by that, because he really did design them to, you know, the Coliseum was a lower horizontal structure, and then it flowed into the Knights, which was a smaller but taller, you know, a strong vertical element. And I believe he was very upset when the Coliseum was torn down. I mean, what architect would want to see their work torn down?
What was the source of the concrete for the pouring in the towers?
I don't recall off the top of my head. I believe we have records on that in the records of the construction of the building, but I don't recall the company that from which we procured that. Sorry.
Have any tiles fallen from the columns?
I do believe there was a period in time where some did come off and they have been replaced. Hopefully that won't happen again.
A viewer writes, excellent presentation. I understand during the 2016 renovations, the new members were pre-weathered. Can you discuss that?
I'm sorry, but I am not familiar with that. As part of the assembling of the exhibit that is at the museum, we received several record cartons of records relative to the construction. And because we were focused on the exhibit, I was not able to read through all of those. So if there was information about that process there, I didn't see it. But if you're interested, anyone that has specific questions about the building that I'm unable to answer in this format, I encourage you to please contact me through the museum website. My email address is there, and I would be happy to put in a research request. And once I can get back in the building and get back to the collection, I'll be happy to look and see if those answers are there in those records.
Very good. Well, thank you, VivianLea. That's going to end the questions. And as we close, I want to extend my thanks to you for sharing your knowledge and your research on the Knights of Columbus headquarters building. And we look forward to your follow-up presentation next week. As VivianLea mentioned,
so much.
Any further questions in this session, feel free to email museum@kofc.org and we will do our best to address them. The video recording of this session will be available, as noted earlier, on the Knights of Columbus YouTube and Facebook accounts. Please expect a follow-up email message with the viewing link. So until next week, good health and God bless.